Behind the gym, the air felt like it was holding its breath. One hit, and a guy was already on the ground, gasping, while his friends froze in fear. But what happened next will shake even the toughest crowd. The air behind the gym felt heavier than usual, thicker somehow, as if it had been holding its breath all day, waiting for this exact moment. A faint breeze stirred the dried leaves on the asphalt, but it couldn't cut through the heat burning off Chase's glare. His grin was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. It wasn't meant to. It was the kind of grin predators wear before the first move, before the teeth sink in. Tyler stood to Chase's left, arms folded, jaw clenched like he'd already decided how this scene would end. Brett bounced slightly on the balls of his feet, trying to mask his nerves with restless energy. His eyes flicked between the twins, trying to decide which one looked softer. Neither did. Jamal and Jordan stood still, side by side, their expressions unreadable. Jamal's hands were tucked casually in his pockets, while Jordan's arms hung loose by his sides. Relaxed, but intentional. They didn't flinch when the boys stepped closer. They didn't speak. They just watched. Chase's voice cut through the silence again, low and cocky. "You two been acting like you run this place. Real cute. Thought maybe it's time someone reminded you where you stand." Jordan tilted his head slightly, as if trying to place a sound he wasn't quite sure he heard. "Where we stand?" "Yeah," Tyler snapped. "This is our school. You're just passing through." The phrase carried weight, more than it seemed on the surface. Passing through wasn't about school. It was about race. It was about belonging. It was about the way white authority clings to territory it thinks it owns. The twins had heard it before, in other places, from other mouths. Brett chuckled, trying to pierce the tension with false bravado. "You ain't got nothing to say now?" Jamal finally looked up, meeting his eyes. Calm. Dead calm. "We didn't come here to talk." That line didn't register right away, not until Chase took a single step forward and Jordan mirrored it instantly, pivoting slightly, his feet landing with surgical precision. The space between them narrowed, the sound of sneakers scuffing pavement. A crow cawed high above, perched on a rusted vent, as if it too sensed that something was about to break. None of the bullies noticed that the twins had taken a half step apart, enough to give each other room, not to run, to move. But not yet. Not until someone touched them first. Not until the trap, so confidently set by others, was finally, fatally sprung. The moment Tyler's fist sliced through the air, time compressed, like a coil snapping loose. His strike was wild, untrained, fueled by arrogance rather than skill. Jamal didn't block it. He redirected it, guiding Tyler's arm past his own shoulder with a flick of the wrist, then drove his palm into Tyler's exposed ribcage, collapsing the larger boy's frame inward. The sickening crunch of cartilage folding echoed off the brick wall behind them, followed by the sharp, hollow gasp of a body that couldn't catch its breath. Tyler hit the ground like a crumpled tent, sputtering, twisted, already out of the fight. Brett hesitated a split second too long. That was all Jordan needed. One step, close the distance. One pivot, sink his weight. And then Brett was airborne, legs flailing, eyes wide in midair as gravity yanked him down into the cement with a smack that silenced even the wind. His head bounced once, then settled. He groaned, dazed, eyes rolling, arms splayed like he'd just been unplugged. Chase hadn't moved. He couldn't. Not because he was restrained, but because something in his brain, some buried survival instinct, had just activated for the first time in his privileged life. His jaw clenched, but his body betrayed him. His legs wouldn't move. His fists stayed down. And suddenly, it wasn't 3 against 2 anymore. It was 1 against reality. Jordan turned toward him, posture loose, breath steady, as if he hadn't even exerted himself. "Still feel like laughing?" he asked, voice flat. Not taunting, not triumphant, just done. Chase didn't answer. Jamal stepped forward, not fast, not slow, just deliberate. He stopped a foot from Chase and leaned in close, voice quiet, eyes steady. You didn't come out here to fight. You came out here to dominate, to remind us where we stand. His breath fogged in the cooling air between them. But now you know. He held the gaze just long enough to let the truth settle. No threats, no boasts, just weight, moral, physical, and personal. Jamal turned away first. Jordan followed. And the bullies? They weren't bullies anymore. Just boys. Beaten not just in body, but in belief. Because what they'd tried to crush with fear stood unshaken. What they thought was prey had shown them power, real power, wrapped in control, in purpose, in restraint. The twins had kept their promise. They used what they knew. But only because this time they had no choice. The Monday morning halls of Westlake High buzzed with a tension no one had words for. It wasn't the usual post-weekend chatter. It was quieter, focused. Eyes darted to phones, then up to faces, then back to phones. Everyone had seen it by now. The grainy video from the art room window. A minute and 42 seconds that shattered the school's hierarchy like glass. Not because of the takedowns, though they were brutal in their efficiency, but because of what came after. The calm, the control, the unmistakable dignity in how the Harper twins walked away. By third period, students weren't talking about touchdowns or prom. They were talking about power, about change. The narrative had shifted overnight. Principal Reeves moved fast. Before lunch, an announcement crackled through the intercom. All students, please report to the auditorium immediately. The room filled in waves, some curious, others nervous. Teachers lined the walls. The faculty looked shaken, as if something bigger than them had been set in motion and they were just trying to keep up. At center stage, Principal Reeves stood with his usual blazer, but something in his posture was different, less guarded, more resolved. He didn't waste time. For years, he began, voice level, certain students have operated without consequence. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Names didn't need to be spoken. Everyone already knew. That ends today. Silence. He went on, describing how behavior that had once been dismissed as boys being boys was no longer tolerable. Not in this building. Not on his watch. Then, with the press of a button, 3 images lit up on the projector screen. Chase, Brett, Tyler. Official disciplinary action. Suspension pending investigation. Gasps. Not because it was unfair, but because it was real. Because for the first time, the untouchables were touched. Outside, the scene was already growing. Parents had arrived, not to defend the aggressors, but to support the twins. Signs with "Justice for the Harpers" waved in the air. News vans parked along the sidewalk. A mic was shoved into a mother's face. She didn't hesitate. Finally, someone stood up, and it was 2 boys who shouldn't have had to. Within 48 hours, the school board met in emergency session. The vote was unanimous. A diversity and safety task force would be formed immediately. Students would sit on it. Voices would be heard. Jamal and Jordan Harper, freshmen, transfer students, formerly invisible, were offered lead advisory roles. And when asked if they'd accept, Jamal simply said, "We're not here to fight." Jordan added, "We're here to fix what broke a long time ago." And for the first time in Westlake's history, people listened. The sun was lower than usual that afternoon, casting long, slanting shadows across the concrete behind the gym. The same walls that had once echoed with tension now stood silent, still smeared faintly with the dust and scuffs left behind from sneakers, struggle, and consequence. The spot looked unchanged to anyone passing by, but to Jamal and Jordan, it had become something else entirely. A marker, a monument, not of violence but of the line they refused to cross, and the strength it took to stop short of it. They stood in silence for a while, letting the breeze carry its quiet between them. Jordan leaned back against the wall, hands in his pockets, watching the sky through the narrow opening between the roof lines. It was the kind of still moment that only made sense after chaos had burned itself out. "You think Dad saw that?" he asked, voice low, steady. Jamal didn't answer right away. He stepped forward, ran his fingers along the rough texture of the gym wall, the place where Chase had once cornered them. His smirk came slowly. "He'd say we got sloppy on the sweep. Too much wrist. Too much flash." Jordan grinned. "Yeah, he'd call it showboating." They both laughed, and this time it wasn't armor. It wasn't a mask they wore to survive. It was real. It was theirs. Behind them, the school buzzed as it always did on a Friday. Lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, students planning weekends. But something had changed. The energy had shifted. No one bumped into them on purpose anymore. No one muttered slurs under their breath. Eyes still followed them, sure, but with something different now. Curiosity, caution, even respect. They hadn't asked to be symbols. They didn't want it. But it came anyway. Not because they fought, but because they didn't become what they were expected to. That was the real victory. It wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It wasn't about putting someone in the dirt and walking away with swagger. It was about standing firm, holding ground, letting the truth hit harder than any punch. And somewhere in that same school, a younger black kid watched them pass in the hall and stood a little straighter, a little prouder. Because for the first time, the fear wasn't automatic. The shame wasn't assumed. Jamal and Jordan hadn't just defended themselves. They'd shifted something in the foundation. Chase, Brett, and Tyler thought they were picking a fight with two quiet kids from Atlanta, but they picked a fight with the wrong future, and the future fought back.